The alien operative crouched in the shadows of a crumbling human city, her three hearts pounding in unison as she watched a man scream at the sky, and the sky screamed back. Aerith Quinn of the Tezhar Reconnaissance Unit had seen war. She had watched entire planets reduced to ash by the Assembly's cleansing fleets. She had witnessed the extinction of species deemed too dangerous to exist. Yet nothing in her centuries of service prepared her for Earth. The human below her stood in the center of a ruined plaza, his face twisted in rage. Around him, flames licked at the edges of shattered buildings, casting jagged shadows. What held Aerith Quinn's gaze wasn't the man's defiance or his guttural cries. It was the shimmering distortion in the air around him, a ripple in reality itself. Analysis, she hissed into her communicator, her voice tight. Energy spike confirmed, her partner, Jean, replied from the cloaked scout ship hovering high above. Origin, biological. Readings are anomalous. No known species matches this signature. Aerith Quinn adjusted her visor, zooming in on the human. The distortion coalesced into something almost tangible, black, crackling tendrils of energy snaking out from his body, lashing at the air. With each cry, the tendrils grew, tearing into the ground, the buildings, the very fabric of reality. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the man fell to his knees. The tendrils evaporated, leaving behind scorched earth and silence. Aerith Quinn's three hearts clenched as she saw the human cradle his head, his shoulders heaving with exhaustion, or was it despair? They call it a demon, Jean said, his voice tinged with unease. A metaphor, perhaps, but their records are unclear. It's tied to extreme emotional states. Demons, Aerith Quinn muttered. She had read the term in human cultural archives, but she had assumed it was mythological. If this was mythology, it was alive, and it was dangerous. The alien operative pulled back into the shadows as the man staggered to his feet. She had seen enough for her report. This was no isolated incident. The reconnaissance mission had already uncovered other humans displaying similar phenomena the Galactic Assembly would consider a threat to universal stability. Quarantine measures will be insufficient, Jean said, reading her mind. If even a fraction of the population can do this, containment is impossible. The Assembly must act decisively. Aerith Quinn clenched her claws. They'll call for extermination. It's the only logical course. Logic. Aerith Quinn hated that word. It was logic that had justified the obliteration of entire species for far lesser transgressions. And yet, as she watched the human limp away, she couldn't deny the fear pooling in her chest. If this was what a single human could do, what would happen if the entire species unleashed their so-called demons? Her thoughts were interrupted by a low rumble. The man had stopped at the edge of the plaza, staring up at the night sky. A human aircraft buzzed overhead, a streak of light against the stars. But the rumble wasn't from the aircraft. It was deeper, primal, resonating in her bones. What is that? Aerith Quinn whispered. Jean's voice was sharp now. Another energy spike. It's massive, off the charts. Get out of there, Quinn. Too late. The man turned his head slightly, as if sensing her presence. For a split second, their eyes met. In his gaze, she saw something that made her blood run cold, not just pain, but resolve. The ground beneath her cracked, a fissure tearing through the plaza. Aerith Quinn leaped back, her visor struggling to compensate for the surge of light. The distortion returned, but this time it wasn't just energy. It was alive. And it was looking at her. She bolted, her cloaking field flickering as she darted into the safety of an alley. Behind her, the plaza erupted in chaos. The man's scream echoed through the night, and for the first time in her long life, Aerith Quinn felt the taste of true terror. Mission compromised, she barked into her communicator. Extraction now. As she ascended into the atmosphere aboard the scout ship, she risked one last glance at the planet below. The humans harbored demons, yes, but they weren't the ones who should be afraid. From orbit, the Galactic Assembly's fleets began to converge on Earth, unaware they had already awakened something they could never hope to contain. The broadcast from the Galactic Assembly was brief, clinical, and cold, a message intended not for dialogue, but for domination. This is an official declaration from the Galactic Assembly to the inhabitants of Earth. Your planet has been deemed a universal threat. For the safety of all sentient life, Earth is now under mandatory quarantine. Resistance will not be tolerated. The message looped across every frequency, relayed through Earth's communication systems without permission. It was an invasion disguised as diplomacy. On the surface, General Elaine Harper of the United Terran Defense Corps stood in the command center of Earth's orbital defense network. The room buzzed with activity, operators tracking the positions of alien ships as they moved into formation around the planet. Harper, however, remained silent, her sharp eyes locked on the holographic display of the incoming fleet. "They're not here to quarantine," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "They're here to make sure humanity doesn't leave Earth alive." Across the table, Dr. Rajan Patel, head of Earth's Xenobiology Division, adjusted his glasses nervously. "They're afraid of us," he said, almost in disbelief. "Afraid of what we might become." Harper turned to him, her expression hard. "Afraid of what we already are." The general gestured to the display, where the fleet continued its slow, deliberate approach. It wasn't just a show of force, it was a prelude to annihilation. The assembly wasn't here to negotiate. They were here to end the threat before it could spread. "Ma'am," a young officer called from the operations deck. "We've intercepted encrypted transmissions between the assembly ships. They're deploying infiltration teams. Ground strikes are imminent." Harper's jaw tightened. "Then it's worse than we thought. They're not just planning to bomb us from orbit, they want to steady us first." Dr. Patel stepped closer, his voice low. "If they learn how to neutralize what they're calling the demon phenomenon, they'll erase us from existence. We can't let that happen." "What do you suggest, Doctor?" Harper asked, her tone sharp. Patel hesitated, then placed a data tablet on the table. "We've been studying the phenomenon ourselves. What the assembly fears isn't a biological anomaly. It's psychological. Emotional. Humans under extreme stress, fear, anger, despair, are able to access a latent potential we don't fully understand." "You're saying it's not just rare?" Harper asked. Patel nodded grimly. "It's dormant in everyone. Every human." The room fell silent. The implications were staggering. Humanity wasn't just a species with a few anomalies. They were a species built to survive at any cost, and that was what terrified the galaxy. Harper broke the silence. "So, we either figure out how to control it, or they'll do it for us." Before Patel could respond, the room's alarms blared. A red alert flashed across the holographic display. The assembly's infiltration teams were making their move. "Multiple atmospheric breaches," the officer reported. "They're targeting research facilities across North America, Asia, and Europe." Harper's eyes narrowed. "They want to cut off our ability to fight back. They're going for our scientists and our data." She turned to her team, her voice like steel. "Activate countermeasures. Deploy defense teams to all priority facilities. No one gets through." As the command center descended into controlled chaos, Harper glanced at Patel. "Doctor, if we don't stop them here, there won't be anything left to save. Give me something we can use." Patel nodded and hurried out, his mind racing. The assembly thought they understood humanity's demons, but they hadn't seen the full extent of what humans could do under pressure. In orbit, the assembly fleet began its first wave of strikes, targeting Earth's defenses with ruthless precision. On the ground, humanity braced for war. As explosions lit up the skies over Earth's cities, a lone human soldier stood on the front lines, eyes burning with an unnatural glow. Somewhere deep within him, the demon stirred, and this time, it wasn't going back into the shadows. The first signs of resistance were not orbital cannons or missiles, but whispers on the encrypted comms of the Galactic Assembly. "Earth isn't fighting like a cornered animal. They're hunting us." The Galactic Assembly's invasion was meant to be swift and surgical, strike key targets, neutralize Earth's ability to respond, and systematically dismantle the human threat. But from the moment the first infiltration teams landed, the operation began to unravel. Commander Jean sat in the command center of the Ardent Pillar, a flagship positioned in low orbit. The screens around him flickered with reports that didn't make sense. Tactical teams disappearing without trace, vehicles destroyed by inexplicable energy surges, and the most baffling of all, human soldiers fighting with ferocity beyond what biological limits should allow. Another squad lost in the Western Quadrant, an officer reported, her voice tight with fear. Their final transmission was unclear. John tapped a clawed finger against his console, reviewing the garbled footage. The visuals showed a firefight in a dense forest. At first, it was standard resistance, human soldiers taking cover, exchanging fire. Then, the distortion began. Figures in the video moved faster than they should have, weapons discharging with unnatural precision. One soldier dropped his weapon entirely and advanced on an armored alien with his bare hands. The recording cut out just as the alien's helmet crumpled like paper. "This isn't standard biological aggression," Jean muttered. "No," a voice said behind him, cold and certain. "It's something else." Aerith Quinn stepped into the room, her uniform still scorched from her recent extraction. Her normally composed demeanor was frayed, her eyes haunted by what she had seen on the surface. "They call it a demon, but it's more than that. It's collective. When one of them unleashes it, others nearby seem to amplify it," she explained, her voice low. "It's not just adrenaline or heightened instincts. It's something deeper, something primal." John's mandibles clicked together as he processed the information. "And we've triggered it on a planetary scale." Before he could give orders, an alert flashed across the command room. A new energy spike had been detected, this time, not on the surface but in low orbit. The ardent pillars shuddered violently as a shockwave rippled through the fleet. "Report!" John barked. "A human strike team," the officer replied, her voice trembling. "They've breached one of the auxiliary destroyers. We're detecting similar energy patterns within their ranks." "Impossible," John hissed. "They can't have the technology to board our ships." Aerith Quinn stepped closer to the display, her expression grim. "They don't need technology. They're using us against ourselves." General Harper watched the holographic map in Earth's Central Command as alien forces moved deeper into human territory. Every inch they advanced came at a steep cost. "Update," she demanded, standing with arms crossed. "Several of their infiltration teams have gone dark," her aide reported. "And we've successfully reactivated Project Revenant." "Status?" "In field testing," the aide said, hesitating. "Then let's see what it can do," Harper replied. In the ruins of a city, a group of human soldiers prepared for the next wave of alien attackers. Among them stood Captain Marco Reyes, his pulse steady despite the chaos around him. He was part of Project Revenant, the initiative to awaken humanity's latent power. The ground rumbled as alien mechs advanced toward their position. Marco closed his eyes, feeling the demon stir within him. It wasn't rage or fear, it was purpose, crystallized into pure, unrelenting force. The first mech fired, its energy blast vaporizing the wall Marco had stood behind. When the dust cleared, he was still standing, his eyes glowing faintly. With a roar that carried far beyond human vocal cords, Marco launched himself at the mech, his fists striking faster and harder than any weapon could. The alien pilots watching from orbit fell silent. This wasn't a fight, it was slaughter. Back on the ardent pillar, Jean stared at the growing reports of devastation. "This isn't war," he muttered, his voice trembling for the first time. "This is survival. And we're not the ones who'll survive." The Galactic Assembly's Grand Fleet had come to Earth to extinguish a threat, but now, their ships burned in orbit, silent testimonies to their miscalculation. The humans weren't monsters, they were something far worse. The control room aboard the flagship Ardent Pillar was chaos. Smoke seeped from damaged conduits, alarms wailed in fractured tones, and Commander Jean stood amidst it all, gripping the edge of a console as reports flooded in. "We've lost 4 destroyers in quadrants Beta and Gamma," an officer shouted, her voice edged with panic. "Human resistance is, no, Commander, it's escalation. Their forces are evolving mid-conflict." John stared at the tactical display, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. Across the planet, humans weren't just holding their ground, they were gaining it. Where aliens had once advanced with precision, entire battalions now fell into disarray, routed by soldiers who fought with an almost supernatural ferocity. What do you mean, evolving? He demanded. Energy spikes from human combatants are increasing exponentially, Aerith Quinn explained, stepping forward. It's not limited to isolated incidents anymore. The more they fight, the more their demons awaken. The commander turned sharply to her, frustration and fear evident in his movements. And how do we stop them? Quinn hesitated, her silence louder than any alarm. The battlefield outside a bombed-out human city was a vision of carnage. Alien mechs and soldiers advanced in formation, their weapons spitting fire into the ruins. At first, it seemed like Earth's defenders were overwhelmed. But then, the tide shifted. Captain Marco Reyes stood at the forefront of his squad, his chest heaving as the demon within him surged. Around him, the other Revenant soldiers mirrored his intensity, their bodies coursing with the same strange energy that had baffled their enemies. Hold the line! Marco roared, his voice carrying above the cacophony of war. An alien mech, towering and gleaming with armor, locked its sights on him. The pilot, confident in the machine's superior firepower, fired a devastating plasma beam. But Marco didn't move. The energy struck, enveloping him in a blinding light, and for a moment, the battlefield paused. When the light faded, Marco was still standing, the ground around him scorched but untouched. His eyes glowed like twin suns, and with a single leap, he closed the distance to the mech. With a roar, he drove his fists into the metal hull, tearing it apart with raw strength. The pilot's final transmission to the assembly fleet was a single, trembling sentence: "They're not soldiers. They're nightmares." From the observation deck of the Ardent Pillar, Jean watched the devastation unfold on the planet below. Entire regiments were being wiped out, their precision weaponry rendered useless against an enemy that seemed to thrive on destruction. "They're adapting faster than we can respond," Aerith Quinn said, her voice tight. "This isn't a battle we can win." Jean's mandibles clicked in frustration. "If we retreat, the assembly will brand us cowards. If we stay," he trailed off, the unspoken alternative clear. "Commander," an officer interrupted, "the human forces are now targeting our orbital platforms. They've somehow coordinated strikes on our shield arrays." "How?" Jean snapped. "It's the same pattern," Quinn said, her tone grim. "Their demons aren't just individual phenomena, they're connected. The more humans fight, the more their power grows collectively. It's as if the entire species is awakening to a shared force." Jean turned to the display, his thoughts racing. Humanity was no longer fighting as individuals. They were fighting as one. Back in Earth's command center, General Harper stood before a holographic map of the assembly fleet. "Project Revenant has proven effective," she said, her voice calm despite the stakes. "It's time to escalate." "Escalate?" one of her aides asked, unsure. Harper nodded. "Deploy the second phase." From hidden facilities deep beneath Earth's surface, launch silos began to open. Humanity's counterattack wasn't just about brute force, it was about precision and overwhelming resolve. Missiles, armed with experimental energy derived from the Revenant project, streaked into the sky, targeting the assembly's fleet. As the first of the missiles detonated, sending a shockwave rippling through the fleet, Jean watched in horror. The energy signature was unmistakable, it wasn't human technology. It was something far older, far more powerful. "They've weaponized it," he whispered. And then the comms went dark. The Galactic Assembly's war councils had long spoken of the need for control, the necessity of order. But now, as their fleets crumbled and their strategies disintegrated, they whispered a different truth: Earth was never chaos. It was creation, unbound and inevitable. The ruins of Earth's cities glowed faintly in the aftermath of the counterstrike. Smoke and fire painted the horizon as humans emerged from the shadows to regroup, their battered but defiant forces standing amidst the wreckage of alien technology. General Elaine Harper stood in the subterranean command center, watching the flickering tactical map. Red markers, representing alien forces, blinked out one by one, consumed by Earth's escalating resistance. Blue markers, human forces, clustered in strategic formations, holding territory once thought indefensible. Harper's grim satisfaction was tempered by the price paid for each victory. Casualty reports flowed across her screen, a sobering reminder that survival came at a cost. "Status on the fleet?" she asked, her voice cutting through the tension. Her aide, Lieutenant Keller, adjusted his headset. Their orbital platforms are destabilized, but the Assembly's flagship remains operational. Scans suggest they're preparing to deploy something massive. What kind of weapon? Harper asked. We're not sure, Keller replied. But it's emitting a power signature we've never encountered before. It's off the scale. Harper turned to Dr. Rajan Patel, who had been silently analyzing the reports. Doctor? Patel adjusted his glasses, his face pale. It's likely they're failsafe. If they can't neutralize us, they'll annihilate us. Commander Jean stood on the observation deck of the Ardent Pillar, staring at the weapon now being readied in the ship's primary hangar. The device pulsed with an ominous glow, its design both ancient and alien. This is a planetary extinction device, Aerith Quinn said, standing beside him. Her tone was even, but her eyes betrayed unease. It's the Assembly's answer to everything they fear, Jean replied bitterly. And yet, even this might not be enough. Quinn frowned. If they deploy it, they'll destroy Earth, but the shockwave will destabilize this entire sector. Every world within reach of the blast will suffer. Then humanity truly becomes their nightmare, Jean said, his voice heavy. A ghost that haunts their history. If Earth dies today, it will take the galaxy with it. The atmosphere in the command center grew colder as Harper and Patel reviewed the scans of the Assembly's weapon. It was an extinction-level event, a device designed to erase not just life, but the very foundation of a planet's ecosystem. They'll use it, Patel said quietly. They're afraid of what we'll become if they don't. Harper's jaw tightened. Then we give them a reason to fear. She turned to Keller. Deploy Phase 3. Target their flagship. Keller hesitated. General. Phase 3 is untested. If it fails, we're dead anyway, Harper interrupted. Launch it. Across the globe, hidden silos opened, releasing a new kind of weapon into the skies. Powered by the same energy that fueled humanity's demons, the missiles streaked toward the Ardent Pillar. Aboard the flagship, alarms blared as Earth's counterstrike closed in. John barked orders to the crew, his composure slipping. Activate all shields. Redirect power to countermeasures. Aerith Quinn stared at the incoming projectiles. Commander, the energy readings from those missiles match the human anomalies. They've weaponized the very thing we came here to contain. John froze, realizing the implications. Humanity hadn't just survived, they had turned their own evolution into a weapon. The missiles struck, detonating in bursts of blinding energy. The Ardent Pillar shuddered violently, its shields collapsing under the strain. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and the ship began to list. In the command center, Harper watched the flagship falter on the tactical map. Is it enough? She asked, her voice a rare whisper. Patel hesitated, then pointed to the scans. The weapon on their flagship, it's destabilizing. But if it goes critical, the blast could still wipe out Earth. Then we push harder, Harper said. Order all Revenant units to focus their efforts. This ends now. As the Ardent Pillar teetered on the edge of destruction, its weapon began to glow brighter, building toward an inevitable detonation. On the surface, Marco Reyes stood amidst the chaos, his glowing eyes fixed on the sky. It's not just us they're afraid of, he murmured. It's what we're becoming. He clenched his fists, the demon within him surging. The final battle wasn't just for Earth, it was for humanity's future. The Galactic Assembly's flagship, Ardent Pillar, burned against the void of space, its lights flickering like a dying star. Yet, even as the colossal vessel faltered, the weapon it carried grew brighter, pulsing with a dreadful rhythm that seemed to echo across the galaxy. Commander Jean clung to a railing as the flagship groaned under the strain of its failing systems. Sparks rained down from shattered conduits, and the bridge crew scrambled to maintain control. But their efforts felt meaningless against the glow emanating from the ship's core, the Assembly's final weapon, now on the verge of detonation. Evaluate the crew, Jean ordered, his voice barely steady. There's no time. Aerith Quinn snapped, gripping the edge of a shattered console. If the core detonates, we'll all be atomized. Jean stared at the tactical display. Below, Earth's surface glimmered with streaks of light as humanity fought back with terrifying ferocity. The weapon was meant to ensure the galaxy's safety, but now it threatened to end everything. Can it be stopped? John asked, though he already knew the answer. No, Quinn said quietly. It's too far gone. General Harper stood in the command center, her fists clenched as she watched the orbital display. The ardent pillar was breaking apart, but its weapon remained active, growing dangerously unstable. Status on their weapon, she demanded. Dr. Patel adjusted his monitor, his expression grim. It's entering critical mass. If it detonates, Earth will be destroyed. Options? Harper asked, though her tone suggested she didn't expect good news. None conventional, Patel admitted. We can't intercept it. But, he hesitated, glancing at the energy readings coming from revenant units on the surface. But what? Harper pressed. There's a chance, Patel said, his voice almost a whisper. If we can amplify the energy emitted by the Revenant project, we might destabilize the weapon before it detonates. Risk assessment? It's unprecedented, Patel said. If we push the Revenant units beyond their limits, we don't know what will happen. But it's this or extinction. Harper's jaw tightened. Do it. On a ruined battlefield, Marco Reyes stood amidst the rubble, staring at the sky. The glow of the ardent pillar's weapon was visible even from the surface, a pulsating star of doom. Around him, his squad, fellow Revenant soldiers, stood battered but alive, their bodies humming with the strange energy that had turned the tide of the war. We've got orders, a voice crackled in Marco's comms. It was Harper. You're the last line of defense, Reyes. If this fails, we're done. Marco nodded, his jaw set. Understood, General. As the connection cut, he turned to his squad. You all feel it, don't you? The others nodded. The demon within them was no longer just a whisper. It roared, a collective force binding them together. We're not fighting for survival anymore, Marco said. We're fighting for what comes next. For what we're meant to be. He raised his hand, and the glow in his chest intensified. One by one, his squad mirrored him, their bodies radiating a blinding light. In the ardent pillar, Jean and Quinn watched in stunned silence as a surge of energy erupted from Earth's surface. It wasn't a missile or a beam weapon. It was raw, unfiltered power, emanating from a cluster of humans on the ground. What are they doing? Jean whispered. Quinn's voice was barely audible. Becoming. The energy struck the flagship's core, intertwining with the unstable weapon. Alarms blared as the two forces clashed, the human energy threatening to consume the device. On the ground, Marco felt the pull of the weapon, its raw power threatening to overwhelm him. But he didn't falter. The demon within him wasn't a force of destruction, it was creation, a force bound by will. Hold the line. Marco roared, his voice amplified by the energy coursing through him. His squad joined him, their combined strength surging into the sky. The weapon's glow faltered, its stability unraveling under the relentless assault. Above Earth, the ardent pillar's core reached its breaking point. With a final, deafening burst of light, the weapon collapsed in on itself, the energy dissipating harmlessly into space. The flagship, gutted and defeated, drifted into silence. On the surface, Marco collapsed to his knees, the glow in his eyes fading. Around him, his squad did the same, exhausted but alive. In the command center, Harper watched as the tactical map cleared. The Assembly's fleet was in full retreat, their forces broken and scattered. We did it, Patel said, his voice filled with awe. Harper shook her head. No. They did it. From a distant observation post, an alien survivor recorded the events for posterity. As they watched the humans on the surface, their voice trembled. They were never demons, the alien said. They are something far greater. Something the galaxy was never prepared to face. The recording ended with a final, chilling note. The galaxy feared what humanity might become. Now, we know. They are not chaos. They are creation. And with that, the universe's perception of Earth and its people was forever changed.